Everyone thinks because you're a zombie, you don't know good coffee. Well, they're wrong. There's only one brew that gets my seal of approval. Deadly Grounds coffee is my guilty pleasure. The aroma is so intoxicating. It brings all of my neighbors out of the woodwork. Deadly Grounds coffee. Coffee to die for and zombie approved. It's good to get a little deadly. Use the front door! Oh, they're so disgusting.
The Dorkening and all affiliated shows are not intended for anyone under the age of 18. The following may contain discussions or scenes that have adult situations, graphic violence, nudity, strong sexual content, and graphic language. This show is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, my garden walkers. Welcome back to another episode of Corpse Garden Reads. We have a very spooky tale of a wintry night, like we are definitely having way too many of. And we get to find out about the only emperor and how we make it to the end. I hope you guys enjoy the story. The Only Emperor, Paul O'Neill. Across the silence of the slush-covered road, the snowy field pulled at Cain, begging him to go dance through its unbroken crust. Hurrying flakes of snow held him captive as alcohol lit its embers within him. A slow buzz began to creep through his stomach, easing the knot of guilt that had been building there since the first snowfall 2 nights ago. He shoved his red fingers into the pockets of his large coat, watching the snowflakes swarm across the night sky like a plague of white locusts. "I love you, pricks," said Marco, shattering the silence. "Nobody I'd rather spend Christmas Eve with. Honest. You all right there, Cain?" Hair plumed out of Cain's mouth like white fire as he looked back at the bus shelter where Marco and Barry huddled on a plastic ledge, passing a bottle of red aftershock between them. He caught the bitter cinnamon scent of the liquor as the chill wind snapped at his cheeks. He'd lived in some bleak towns, but Pitlair was the worst yet. He felt something was always watching him, beaming its hateful stare between his shoulder blades. A shiver lanced through him, and he let out a heavy sigh. An aftertaste of aniseed crawling the back of his throat. "Hey, skinhead," called Barry, his neck tucked into his puffed-out chest. "What's your problem, you mopey arsehole? Put a smile on that face, or I'll punch you so hard you'll not wake up till New Year." Cain turned his attention back to the snowy field. He'd never seen snow lie so still, so perfect. A small mound marked the lip of the hill that dipped sharply. A perfect place to sled down, he mused, though none of his previous 4 families had ever owned a sled. Cut him a break, Baz. Sounds like he's getting the boot from his foster family. The mixture of street dirt and snow melt reached his nostrils as he stared at the shifting, dancing snow shapes in the sky. Feeling his balance waver, a dark shape caught his eye. A boy stumbled through the white field, reaching the crest of the hill. Kane blinked and shook his head. The boy left no trail of snow in his wake. The figure spread its thin arms wide, bit its knees, and leapt down the hill and out of sight. Kane's right trainer squelched as he stepped onto the road. "Where are you going?" shouted Barry. "You not talking to us, princess?" "I tell you what, for somebody about to be turfed out on the street, you've got an entitled way about you." A familiar white blaze of anger pulsed through Kane's temples, and he ran his tongue across the vertical scar inside his cheek, where a former father had slit him with a Stanley knife. He stepped back onto the path. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure I'm not sleeping on the streets. And would you get your chin out of your neck? You're not intimidating anybody, looking like a jacked up frog." "You wee, easy Baz, calm down, big man," said Marco. Barry snorted, then yanked the bottle from Marco and downed 3 large gulps, all while glaring at Kane. When he was done, he wiped the sticky red liquid dribbling down his chin. "Oh, I know what's got your knickers in a twist. It's your wee pal, ain't it? You're thinking about what happened to the spicky prick. He's probably lying down the bottom of that field there under all the snow." The bottle shook in Marco's hand as he lifted it to his lips, like he had some kind of wasting disease, and he spilled more down the front of his jacket than he drank. "What was it he did just before we broke off school last Christmas? Talking some pish about ice cream?" Kane stared down at the snow-splattered path and whispered a part of the poem he remembered little Donnie reciting so passionately. "Let the lamp affix its beam. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream." The poem had given him the shivers for days, and he couldn't keep it out of his head. It had repeated itself over and over until the day Donnie vanished. He tried to swallow the rising guilt in his throat, but it wouldn't shift, so he turned his attention to the field again. Kane. The faintest whisper carried his name on the winter wind, and he swung his head in every direction, looking for its source. He shook his head, then laughter exploded from the bus shelter, the noise amplified by the enclosed space. "You're regular Raby Burns, Kane," hollered Marco. "Didn't know you had it in you. Always did wonder why you hung about with that Donnie," said Barry. "Did you write each other wee love notes and read them out loud?" Kane turned, his jaw muscles clenching. "Shut up, Barry." "Or what?" Barry stood, bottle of liquor clutched like a weapon. "If I mind right, you laughed just as loud as the rest of us at that nerdy prick." He was right. Donnie had looked Kane right in the eye when the classes were up during the impromptu recital, and a long moment had passed between them. Donnie had learned how to deal with the constant jibes thrown his way. But the disappointment in Donnie's eyes when Kane cackled alongside his hooting classmates still haunted his sleep. "Kane," a small, cold voice called again. He stepped towards the bus shelter and stood eye to eye with a red-faced Barry. They stared at each other, and Kane smelled the foul mix of aniseed and cigarettes on Barry's breath. Kane grabbed the bottle, making Barry flinch. He took 4 long gulps and handed it back, sucking in freezing air through his teeth. A great cloud of angry gnats buzzed inside Kane's skull. Last December, when he heard Donnie had gone missing for a long walk to clear his head, Kane ran around Pitler, desperately calling his friend's name into the empty air. When he reached the snow-covered grounds of an abandoned church, he tripped over a root of an oak tree and came face to face with his friend's small, twisted body. The cracked lens of his thick-rimmed glasses lay crooked on his face. His taut skin was mottled with shades of custard yellow, blue and purple that Kane hoped never to see again. He bolted home to call for help, but when the cops eventually showed up, the body was gone. No one believed him, and he'd spent the night in cells for wasting police time. Hearing Donnie's recital of Wallace Stevens' poems cycle round and round in his brain had stared endlessly at the gray walls. Alcohol blew numbing fire through his veins as he stared into Barry's missing eyes. Donnie was going places. He'd have made more of himself than any of us. Maybe a worthless rat, I tell you. Kane leaned back, his head butted Barry square in the nose. Barry toppled sideways like a felled tree, landing in a heap beside the bus shelter. Kane booted a plexiglass window and kept on kicking until a long, rectangular, clear plastic until a long, thin rectangle of clear plastic came away from its fixings. He grabbed it in 2 hands and crossed the road, looking back at Marco and Barry, who stared brawling inside the shelter. His trainers crunched across the snowy field, and he crested the small rise, looking down the steep hill onto a plain of unbroken white. The wind picked up, sending wisps of misty snow into the air like sand in a storm. I've been waiting for you, Kane. He dropped the clear plexiglass on the snow and threw himself on it. Splashes of white plumed up from both sides of his makeshift sled, and he sped down the hill. The ground leveled out to a vast white nothingness as he slid to a stop, wiping hot tears from his cheeks. On his way down, the snow had whipped up into a blizzard, flying into his face like he was in a spaceship streaking past the stars. He stepped off his makeshift sled, and snow swallowed his trainers, coming halfway up to his calves. Cold seeped through the puffy coat as he hugged himself, trying to rub some of the warmth into his arms. Kane, what the hell are you doing down, pal? He said, seeing nothing but misty white all around. His words bounced around as though he was standing in a dark cave, not an open field where cows once roamed. He leaned into the howling wind as he blew its sharp chill into his eyes. A layer of crisp, sparkling snow crackled underfoot. He pinched his feet through it, reaching the compact ground beneath. The scent of earth and grass floating up to his nostrils as he trundled on. Just before he vanished, Donnie had come to Kane's home, sneaking into his room to avoid his foster folks and their awkward, stilted ways of talking to kids. Kane had gone to steal some cans of juice from the kitchen when he returned. Donnie was still sitting cross-legged on the floor beside a small box that Kane kept under his bed. His friend flicked through a small, worn journal. Kane dropped the cans of juice and yanked the book from Donnie's hand. "What do you think you're doing?" Kane exploded. "I thought I'd find some naked lassies under there," said Donnie, gazing at Kane in the open way he had. "How long you been writing poems?" "Poems? They're not poems. They're just... If you tell anyone, I'll smash your specs off your face. Got that, Kane? They're good. I swear. I mean, you're writing so wobbly. It looks like you did it sitting on a washing machine, but they're so raw." Kane pressed a balled up fist against his forehead. "How many did you read?" "Just a couple. You never said how it felt getting carted about so many foster carriers. The family is forever. Really stung, you know. You can talk to me about stuff like that." You don't need to go bottling it up. Tell anyone and you'll be sorry." Donnie stood. "Why? You think writing a poem makes you queer or something?" Kane scowled, and a vein pulsed in the center of his forehead. The journal was a place where he tried to expel his angry demons. When he wrote, he pressed the nib into the paper so hard, nearly every page was ripped. "It's not that. It's just... Donnie pushed his large glasses up his nose. I get it. Heaven forbid you actually try at something and get caught doing it. Kane, you've got something here. Trust me, you deserve better than the hand God dealt you." "God?" Kane threw the book at Donnie. The spine bounced off his freckly cheek and pages fluttered as the book struck the floor. "You think God gives a shit about forgotten people like me? Get out before I do something I regret." That had been the last time he'd seen Donnie alive. He'd blown up like he always did when things got too tough or too close. And he pushed away the only person who'd ever encouraged him to be better. His feet looked like white cinder blocks covered in compact snow as he crunched on. The wind whistled as though someone blew through a glass bottle as snow latched itself on every surface of his clothes like a new skin. He looked about for any landmarks, but all he saw was nothing in every direction. It seemed like he wasn't moving at all. He thought about how many times he'd lost it over the years, blasting through foster carriers in countless screaming matches. "I am down here, hurry. Donnie, that you?" Donnie's whisper turned into a screech that wrung his ears. "They've almost got me, Kane. Help!" When Kane removed his hands from his throbbing ears, a shadow blurred across the snowy surface. It stumbled towards a drift of snow that rose up, circling into the air like a small tornado. The wind almost knocked Kane over, sending needles of ice pinging against his face. He stood outside the spinning, misty vortex, squinting his eyes, seeing Donnie's shadow vanish inside. He reached a hand in and jerked back like ice sliced his palm, making blood drip into the snow. Silence billowed around him as winter wind stilled. The cyclone of snow grumbled like a wall of dry sand. A scorched wooden door stood where the swirling snow had begun. There was nothing on either side of it. Written in claw marks scratched across the wood were words, "Your forever family awaits." Kane stepped forward and reached out a hand to turn its golden doorknob. His hand stopped as ice fizzed up from the ground, covering the wood like a colony of ants devouring it. When the popping and crackling sound stopped, Kane saw the door had been engulfed, turning into a misshapen lump of white blue crystal. He placed his fingertips on the doors, and scalding cold seared up his hands. When he pulled it away, small pieces of skin remained on the door. "Help me!" Kane's shaking hand moved across the handle and was now laced with shards of jagged ice. "I've finally cracked. I'm making this all up in my head. It can't possibly be you. I saw you, dead in the snow." "Don't leave me in here alone," Donnie's small voice echoed. He closed his eyes, recalling the mottled, ice-burnt face of the only boy he'd ever known as a true friend. Kane set his hand on the doorknob. Ice sliced his palm, sending tendrils of blood on the door. Where it hit the ice, the crimson smoked, then turned solid. He turned the handle, pulled the door open, and jumped inside. As Kane stepped into a picturesque winter wonderland, his foot fell through inches of fluffy snow. The night's bitterness stung his cheeks as the door slammed shut behind him. It melted away down through the snow, leaving a deep hole that was soon covered by a constant dusting of snow. That's mud all around. The snowy landscape was postcard perfect, looming large were rows of huge snow sculpted creatures. Kane walked over to a giant crow that stood 4 times his height. It gazed down at him like he was a worm, its feathers carved into such intricate details he almost expected it to take flight. The statues of snow and ice stood in 2 rows facing each other, inviting him to walk down the middle of them. He shielded his eyes, gazing into the distance. The sculptures stretched as far as he could see. A dark figure ran out from behind the raging snow dragon and down the middle of the countless sculptures. "Dottie, wait!" The snow deepened as Kane lumbered after him. It was like wading through water. The cold misted his chest, and he wheezed for air. He willed his legs to power through the packed snow and go after Donnie, who didn't leave a trail, but his burning lungs forced him to stop. He leaned on his thighs of white powdered jeans, catching his breath. "Donnie, stop! Let me help you!" The blustering wind stung as it hit the sweat of his forehead. He felt the chill, the tears that streaked down his face. He felt a chill, the tears that streaked down his face. This was all his fault. He'd blown up at Donnie, and for what? For encouraging him? If he'd just kept his cool that day, Donnie wouldn't have gone for a walk alone that night, disappearing forever. "Donnie!" His shout was whipped away by the fierce wind. Kane stared up, and Snowflake brushed his face. A massive owl made of snow held him in its all-knowing gaze. Kane thought that if he turned his back, the owl would swoop down silently, tearing him with sharp talons before ripping him to shreds with its beak that glinted like glass. He walked on, looking behind him every other minute. Sensing cold, praying eyes examine him, only the arms of animals stood. Only the army of animals stood, their eyes tracking him as he stepped through the snow, something blurred by his cheek, leaving a disturbance of cold air in its wake. A snowball rolled to a stop in front of him, making the little comet streak in the snow. Howling laughter broke the silence, making Cain jump, and he tumbled into the snow. He stood looking in the direction of the loud cackling. He rubbed his eyes, waiting for them to refocus. In the distance, a jaunty snowman with a huge stripy top hat stood, hunched in the middle of the field. Its hysterical laughter rose and rose. Though the snowman didn't move, Cain caught a silver glimmer bouncing off its face. Like sunlight reflecting off a mirror, Cain stepped backwards a few paces, spun, then ran through the river of snow. Donnie appeared in front of him, pointing his finger towards the large gateway that appeared on the white horizon. A snowball pelted Cain's shoulder, sending a spray of snow into his eyes, and cackling exploded from behind him. He turned to see the snowman just 20 paces away, gazing at him with black stone eyes. His blood felt weak as he beheld the impossible vision. Hearing clown-like laughter climb octaves, he shoved his hands over his ears, but the noise was coming inside his head. It made his stomach heave, his legs gave in, sending him flopping into his knees in the powdering snow. "Don't let it suck you up," Donnie's voice called. "Get on your feet, Cain. This way." The snowman's mocking laughter fizzled out. A booming voice rang inside Cain's head. "Oh, this way indeed. Step right up, Cain. Step right up. Admission is free for street dirt like you." Donnie paid the full price. Such a talented boy, that one. But you pushed him right into our hands, didn't you? Come, the Christmas adventure of a lifetime awaits. Cain gazed into the snowman's unmoving face, its sharp twig arms frozen in place as if they reached out to him. It looked like a typical snowman, though his head tilted as it was giving him a stern talking to. The ice blue bristles grew below its nose and chin. He took 2 steps backwards, then fled towards the distant gate, his legs burning as he chopped through the heavy snow. A noise like a boat speeding through the water, roaring behind him. Then a ball of ice flew past his face, tearing a gash along his cheek. He stumbled to the ground and turned as the snowman halted right in front of him, its top hat wobbling as it stopped, as though Cain's gaze had it frozen in place. Cain wiped his cheek, flicking spots of blood into the snow around his feet. You can't have Donnie. He's family. The snowman's mouth opened wide, revealing thousands of needle teeth that glinted blue in the moonlight. It launched itself forward, and Cain caught a glimpse of hideous, bloodshot eyeballs in the snowman's gullet. It glared at him, threatening to turn the contents of his stomach to water. Cain sidestepped and slapped the side of the snowman's head. One of its needle-slit teeth lanced through his shoulder, spilling hot blood that mingled with the cold air in a fusion of pain. He clutched his arm as he lay in the white powder, staring up at the huge snowflakes that streamed into the air. Against the white of the clouds in the sky, the flakes looked as like thousands of gray flocking bats. You'll make such a nice addition to the festival of wonders we have here, said the snowman. We're your family now, Kane. And isn't that all you've ever wanted? A family who will take care of you who would take you in and actually want to keep you? Kane stood, still clutching his bleeding shoulder. He clenched his jaw. A cold shudder ran through him as he stepped backwards, away from the evil thing before him. The snowman hopped forward, its mass of 3 large snowballs coming apart and then snapping back together as it moved through the snow. You're not getting to keep us. I'll find Donnie and we'll... Kane closed his eyes, seeing Donnie's eyes light up. That day he'd read Kane's hidden poem. Donnie! He shouted in a hoarse voice. You hear me? I'm sorry for pushing you away. Come help me fight this lopsided freak. The snowman paused, cocking its head, a huge smile growing upon its jolly face, revealing rows of glinting teeth. Oh, but you will push him away again. That's what you do, isn't it, Kane? You hide whatever makes you sing inside, as singing in this town is forbidden. Come with me, we can sing forever. You should listen to the poem Donnie writes now. They're rather dark. Kane walked forward, stopping an arm's length from the waiting snowman, and stared into its black marbled eyes. You think you can just steal my best pile and get away with it, eh? The snowman's sharp, grotesque smile fell, turning into a scowl. It leaned back and let out a sky-splitting roar. Then it darted forward, opening its mouth wide enough to swallow Kane whole. Kane stepped back, seeking the metallic spines coming for him, then lunged forward, cramming his hand down the thing's throat. Wrapping its fingers around the waxy eyeball inside, the snowman gurgled and closed its teeth around his forearm, slicing and tearing its way through his coat into his flesh. He tried to scream, but all that came out was a hushed wail. And he pulled on the arm, trying to free it. As he tugged, peels of his skin scraped off. Agony exploded through him. He placed a foot on the snowman's face and yanked as he squeezed the moist, pulsing eyeball in his hand. The thing let out a burbling cough, and Kane's arm came loose, sending him crashing into the snow. The fresh cold let up his arm in agony as the snow around him soaked up the crimson that flowed from the crisscross slits of his flesh. In his hand, the eyeball darted its gaze about in alarm, wrapping its tentacle-like nerve around Kane's bloodied forearm. He got to his feet, threw the eyeball-shaped thing out in front of him, and kicked it as far as he could, leaving a yellow, curdled smear of milky pus on his trainer. The snowman rose, and Kane's world turned into slow-motion nightmare as he watched the river of red pour from its mouth of full razor teeth. A trembling weakness made his muscles useless, and he stumbled backward, seeing every minute minute spark of light that ran across each length of deadly metal in the snowman's mouth. With its black twig hands, it tore a handful of spikes from its mouth and cocked one arm back, ready to throw them at Cain. But then something black streamed through the snowman, making it explode in a puff of powdery snow that fell to the ground. "Donnie!" yelled Cain as he sprinted after Donnie. He collapsed now. He knew he'd stay here forever, linking his life into the welcoming white. He willed his feet to slice through this tall snow. The agony in his arm ascended to levels that made his vision pulse in and out. He puffed out clouds of shaky cold air following a trail of balled up paper. The freezing wind snapped through him as he stumbled under the archway built of solid twinkling ice. He leaned against its slick surface, a cloud of cold vapor building in his lungs, making him splutter and wheeze. His tattered arms sang a faraway note of agony as numbness took it. He squeezed his eyes shut, then dragged his feet through the snow, following the trail of paper. On the top of the massive arch, a white crow cawed, the sound echoing through the silent wasteland. Cain's heart galloped in weak, uneven beats, and his legs crumpled beneath him. He hacked up rivulets of blood that was swallowed by the snow in which he lay. The chilly softness bade him stay as snow fluttered around the top of his jacket to cool himself off. His useless hands trying to unzip it, he groaned in anguish when his numb fingers couldn't do as he asked. He knew he had to get up and not close his heavy eyes, or else he'd freeze to death in the cushion of snow. He pulled himself up and managed to unfurl one of the balls of paper. It was a sprawled line from one of his poems, a street dirt boy deep in the never. He awaits a dawn that will never be. The wind snatched the yellowed paper from his hand. He smelled the pines of two massive evergreen trees that grew out in the snow in the garden filled with icy flowers, and fountains that had spewed water into the air, which had now frozen in jagged alien formations. A figure stood at the end of the garden between the trees, its back turned as it read something in his hands. "Donnie, I came. Cain called, but the sound was carried off by the wind. He dragged himself forward, the powdery snow caking his knees. His injured arm dangled loose from the shoulder, like it didn't belong to him. White static fizzled around the edges of his vision, and the next thing he knew, he was lying face down in the snow. He crawled at the sudden engulfing dark. When he broke the surface, he sucked in a breath of icy air that burned his throat. He tried to stand, but his muscles refused to obey, so he crawled towards Donnie, the cold wetness caking his chest. He kept his head above the snow. "Donnie!" yelled Cain, yards from his friends turned back. "Donnie, it's me!" His world spun as he battled to his feet, blinking the clumps of snow from his eyelashes. "Donnie, come on! Let's get out of here." He heard the constant high-pitched note in his ears. The blustering wind erased the silence. He stepped forward. "Donnie!" Spots of color exploded in his vision. He felt his brain begin to short out again. He knelt in the snow, closing his eyes, tethering himself to the solid ground. He tried to rub the bridge of his nose, but his fingers wouldn't bend. So he ran a freezing hand along his forehead instead. "Donnie," he croaked, "it's all my fault. If I just kept my cool, you wouldn't be in this place. You've helped me more than I can ever tell you. Let's go before we freeze forever, all right?" "Donnie!" Kane tried to stand, fell onto the snow, then tried again, feeling his heart thump slowly in his chest. He willed himself on, finding the last of his energy, and he reached Donnie and put a hand on his friend's bony shoulders. Then the hand sizzled like he'd placed on hot iron. Then Donnie let out his throaty, slowly growing laugh that made his small shoulders bounce up and down. Kane fell back into the snow. Donnie's little frame turned, his eyes blazed with pale binding light and long needles protruding from his mouth. Kane's friend smiled, then stepped forward, opening his mouth until Kane heard the dislodging of a jawbone. Okay, guys, like I said, I am a big Doctor Who fan, and I love the Snowman episode. And I love seeing what authors do with that big, scary, pointy teeth snowman and it coming to kill you. And this one was one of those unexpected finds that was just absolutely beautiful. There was no winning in this story. Well, not for Donnie and not for Kane. But it was one of those beautiful horror stories where you don't know what's going to happen and you don't know what to expect. And you end up dying, bleeding, and eaten in a winter wonderland. So I hope you guys go find Apollo Nail and check out his stuff and find out more of what he does. I shall try to find links and put them in the group. But until then, thank you for joining. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please tell me in the comments what you thought. And if you like the whole snowman killing motif, because I always do. If you're a Doctor Who fan, I'd love to find that out too. And please keep reading scary stories. And keep watching scary movies. And I hope you always come back to Fae Corps and Owl Light and see what we're doing here. Have a wonderful night. Thank you for coming.